The question of the day is, what happens to those who haven't heard the gospel?
Let's turn to the book of Romans,
Okay.
where we turn to all questions of this nature.
Oh,
All questions of this nature, because it has to do with the righteousness of God, and the theme of the book of Romans is the righteousness of God. So let's turn to Romans. Let's turn down to Romans chapter 2, please. I also want to mention that this question usually comes up in an evangelistic situation, in that when you begin to tell someone that they need to trust Christ, when you begin to give someone to understand they need to get saved, they need to get born again, what do they think about Jesus Christ? The person will often respond, especially if they're trying to wiggle out, they'll say, well, what about the person that never heard the gospel? You know, it wouldn't be fair for God to send them to hell because they never heard the gospel. Therefore, and then they'll try to take you off the track. And sometimes why they'll say that is because they are under conviction for their sins and they want to push off your message. So when you start reasoning with them of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, well, what about the people that never heard? What about the people down in Africa that never heard? What about?
What about that?
Yeah, because what they want to do is shift your focus to this person over here, or this person over here, or that person over in Africa, instead of, let's not talk about my sins.
Right.
Let's talk about the sins of this guy over here, or some hypothetical guy down the street, or something like that. So I do want to mention that often is when this question comes up. And looking at the book of Romans, particularly chapter 1 and chapter 2, helps to answer this question. Mm-hmm. And the short answer to the question is, those individuals are judged based on whether or not they followed their consciences. That's the short answer. The short answer is the guy that never heard, the gal that never heard, they're judged based on whether or not they followed their consciences.
Right.
Now, the heathen don't follow their conscience any more than you do.
And you'd be hard-pressed today to find someone that never heard. I mean, even in the most remote parts of Africa, some missionaries have told us they have internet. In the most remote parts of Africa.
They do, and I've seen videos myself of some places deep in the jungle where the people lived in these little tree huts on stilts, basically. And as the video panned by the side of the thing, you could see the people inside the tree huts with no plumbing and no running water inside the tree huts with televisions. Inside the tree huts. And for that reason, this is kind of an academic, hypothetical question, but we'll answer it. It's still a legitimate question, right, even though it's kind of a hypothetical situation, because those people in the tree huts down in Africa that have televisions in them, all they got to do, in a sense, is turn on a gospel program of some nature with somebody preaching John 3:16 in a language they can get it, and they can be saved.
Right.
They may never have the opportunities because they don't have the resources of somebody that's saved in a more advanced country. They may not have access to deep Bible teachers. They may never grow to become very educated Christians or something like that. But as far as the Lord's responsibility to get them the gospel truth, He'll get it to them. Amen. He'll get it to them. And when people don't hear the gospel, they're judged based on whether or not they followed their conscience. And most people don't follow their conscience, at least not all the time. That's why the heathen are lost. That's why they need to have the gospel preached to them. That's the short answer. If you want the longer answer, basically what you want to do is read Romans chapter 1 through chapter 3. Chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3 will give you a better sense on that. But the short answer is they're judged on the basis of whether or not they're following their conscience, whether they're following all the light, spiritual light that God has given them, right, or whether they're not. And let's look in Romans chapter 2. Romans chapter 2. Let's look in verse 13 through 16, please. Romans 2, verse 13 through 16, where the Bible says this. For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. For when the Gentiles, that's anybody that's not a Jew, this is, for example, the guy that never heard, tucked away in a jungle somewhere. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these, having not the law, are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law, written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another, in the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ, according to my gospel. The heathen are judged based on whether or not they follow their conscience. They don't follow their conscience any more than most people do. That's why they're lost. They need the gospel preached to them. No doubt about it. And yet, in their hearts, they have the works of the law written. For example, you'd be hard-pressed to go to South America or Central America or Africa. You'd be hard-pressed to go there and find a native tribe that didn't have rules on the books and moral codes and laws about not committing adultery and not stealing.
They know it's wrong without anyone telling.
They didn't have to have it on the Ten Commandments. They know in their heart, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery. You say, well, they may not know about the Sabbath. Well, they may not. They may not know all of the particulars of Jewish history. But you know what? They don't have to. And that's the answer to the question.
Because God writes it on your heart.
God writes it on your heart. And you're judged based on how well you followed the light that you had. The spiritual light that you had, how well did you follow it? The Bible says, unto whom much is given,
much is required.
Much is required. And where that puts most people that are going to watch this video is obvious, because you sure got a lot that's been given to you as far as Bible studies, Bible opportunity to learn, opportunity to hear preaching, and it's worth considering. Unto whom much is given, much is required. And that's the answer to today's Bible question. If you have a Bible question, please put it in the comments below. We'd be happy to speak with you about it. And until then, the Lord bless you.